Hi, everyone, and welcome to another Reigniting Small Business Podcast. I'm Laura Richards, and of course, I'm joined today with my partner, Patrick Lee, CEO of Spark Business Institute. Who am I today? Patrick, how are you?
I am good.
Good. So there's a lot of confusion out there around the most recent $1.9 trillion COVID-19 relief bill, which was signed March 11th, called the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021. And we are joined here today with Christina Bennett, who's VP of Emerald Financial Services and our expert to kind of take a deep dive into some of these details of the plan and how it might be impacting small businesses and us as personally as well. So welcome, Christy.
Thank you.
So you guys, as to streamline things a little bit, I'm going to take myself out of the flow for a while and let you all have a discussion, and I'm going to join you again in the back end.
Sounds good. Thanks, Laura.
All right.
So, Christy, before we get into the scintillating details of this new bill and how it impacts everybody's finances, how's your tax season going?
It's been very interesting. I mean, I've never had a tax season where they've made retroactive tax changes to while we're in the middle of filing. So that's been very, very interesting. So we're actually holding off on some filings. We're just trying to keep up with the changes.
This has got to be almost a year of just being in tax season. I mean, with the extensions last year, all the new bills, and then what's happening now, you really haven't had much of a break.
No. So when people say, oh, you slowed down in the summer. No, it did not happen. It did not happen at Christmas. It did not happen at Thanksgiving. It's just been 12 months of tax law reading, really, essentially.
And for those of us who stay as far away from that stuff as possible, we don't envy you, just so you know. So let's get in a little bit into this. We've had multiple economic relief bills, stimulus bills coming out, and in the beginning of this, we didn't actually think we were going to be coming back to have another podcast around this, but people were starting to get used to, I think, the PPP, the idea of forgiveness. Some of this stuff had become almost routine where everybody kind of had a sense of it. I'm hearing a lot of confusion out there with this most recent bill. And what does it mean? What's happening? What is it changing? What is it actually doing? Who's eligible? That sort of thing. So give us a little bit of an overview. We won't get into the details yet, but just, high level overview. What does this bill do?
So this bill has increased PPP funding. It's put more money into the economic disaster loans. It's extended some of the old things from the CARES Act or the FFCRA Act, which was the first bill passed back in March. It's extended the employee retention credit, extended unemployment benefits, vaccines, COVID testing. It's also put money more into the nonprofits, as you probably know more about than I do, but not a ton of new things for small business, just extensions of the old things.
So when we look at that, extensions of the old things, meaning that if you've already gotten PPP money, that there's not much happening for you here. This is more of folks who haven't yet gotten it. And who would those folks be? Because it feels to me like everybody who was going after a PPP loan has gone after a PPP loan.
Well, remember initially when PPP funding came out, it was only for people who had employers or employees. So if you had started a company, God forbid, in March of 2020, you weren't really eligible for PPP funding because you probably didn't have any employees yet. If you were a partnership, you weren't making guaranteed payments yet. Like all of these things were unclear or hadn't happened for you yet. So new businesses are now allowed to try to come in and get some of these funds. So yes, if you have hit the first round of PPP funding and you've gotten that loan, you have a second loan available to you. If you have gotten that, you're done. there's no other PPP funding. There's just additional funds put in for some of these new businesses that started in 2020 and now actually have wages to calculate what they can get.
Okay. And how about the EIDL? I know that was another big piece of this whole formula. And is there additional monies for businesses that have already gotten this, or is this once again another one of these for those that have not yet received anything? Here you go.
Sure. My understanding is that this is for businesses who applied, but the EIDL ran out so fast. So if people applied in 2020, my understanding is this is just for new applicants. It's not like you can go get a second EIDL loan.
Okay. And so then, in terms of anything new, what is this bill targeting that hasn't already been targeted, if anything at all?
So new businesses that started in 2020, they are allowing those companies to get some funding via PPP, EIDL, or the Employee Retention Tax Credit. It's also giving funds to nonprofits indirectly through the states. So what it's done is it's allocated funds to the states, and then the states will push those funds out. Other than that, it's housing, it's tax credits for the individuals. They actually had a student loan debt forgiveness provision in there for loans forgiven between 2021 and 2024. Typically, cancellation of debt is included in taxable income. They've excluded that for that time period. They've extended or expanded, I should say, dependent care benefit credits for 2021. They're going to do advances on the child tax credit for 2021, starting supposedly in June or July. Obviously, they've made changes to unemployment. Unemployment's not taxable now for 2020 and 2021, up to a certain level, and as long as you're under certain amounts. So that's really, if you are a self-preparer, like now might not be the time to be doing that. If you collected unemployment and you're making over $150,000 a year, that's included in taxable income, but you might want to look at married filing separate because then it might not be included in taxable income. So it's not a time to be trying to navigate the shark-filled waters.
Okay. So let's flip a little bit to the tax implications here, because I know that one of the things that there wasn't maybe a lot of new money in this for folks who've already dipped into the well a bit, but there is a whole bunch of changes on tax credits, tax filing dates. There seems to be more impact for those of us who've already gone through this COVID stimulus stuff in this bill.
Sure. I would say more of the tax consequences came out in the December bill. So in the December bill is where they clarified whether PPP forgiveness was actually going to be included in taxable income or were the expenses going to be allowed. Well, there was going to be a taxable event to that. In December, they said no taxable event. You don't have to claim the income and you may deduct the expenses. So that was clarified in the end bill in 2020. EIDL advances are not taxable. State grants are still taxable at this point, but there may be a deduction on the state side because Maryland has just come out with a bunch of grants that are not going to be included in taxable income in Maryland. So it's really looking at all the different legislation and the different bodies of legislation that's coming out to figure out what's really happening. I think the biggest thing to really look at from a planning standpoint is the employee retention credit. Initially, when the CARES Act came out in 2020, if you received PPP funds, you could not participate in the employee retention tax credit program. Well, they changed that at the end of 2020. So you may need to look at going back and amending some of your payroll returns to try to get that money if you had employees other than yourself. So if you're a shareholder, you don't qualify, you as an employee don't qualify for that retention tax credit. But if you had other employees, unrelated parties, those employees' wages would qualify for that retention tax credit. So you have to look at, how am I applying for my forgiveness? What wages am I using for that? Do I have anything left over to use for the employee retention tax credit? And looking at all those planning pieces. And then, of course, the employee retention tax credit was extended in this American Rescue Plan of 2021 through the end of 2021. So again, when you're going for forgiveness on maybe your second PPP loan, planning what expenses are you using for the PPP loan forgiveness, and what expenses can I use for the employee retention tax credit, and pulling those pieces together to try to paint a big picture.
So you've convinced me not to try to file my own taxes. So thank you for pointing me.
I don't even file my own taxes. As far as due dates, the IRS has extended the deadline to file your individual tax return until May 15. However, that seems to be the only return at this point that they have extended the due date for. So if you have estimated tax payments, you still need to make those by April 15. If you have a corporate C Corp return due, that's still due April 15. If you had a 990 or anything like that that was due on April 15, that's still due. It is literally just the individual tax returns that are extended until May 15. Maryland has extended to July 15 on everything. When I say everything, individual tax returns, partnership returns, C Corp returns, all due July 15, including estimated tax payments. What has not been extended is the due date of your Maryland personal property return. That is due April 15. So trying to keep track of all the different deadlines, because we didn't extend as a unit, we extended as each individual, has been hairy.
So anybody not in Maryland needs to be aware that their state's dates
Sure.
could be almost anything. They need to be checking to see how that lines up with the federal. Yeah. Okay. Christy has frozen. You're muted, Laura.
We'll see if Christy comes back to us here in a second. She definitely looks like her computer is having some kind of error there, but I'm going to remove her from the stream just for the minute, and we can add her back in if she comes back along. But Patrick, let's you and I talk a little bit about some of the takeaways, and I think we've gotten a lot into the specifics of the bill. But what are some of the broader implications?
Well, I think if we want to talk high level, and this is, you hear a lot of complaints about how does government legislate to business, because government doesn't understand business. And I think you see that in this bill, and I think you've seen that in each one of these bills, because we have a 1.9 trillion bill now to help do this, but that 1.9 trillion is not, who's it directed to? Like, all these small businesses that have already participated who are still struggling, we don't get to participate again, right? There's additional, this is extending. So I'm sure there's some uses there, but it starts looking to me like, where is the vast majority of this money going to go? And we saw this in the first couple bills, right? We saw that, it was earmarked for small business, medium-sized business, and all of a sudden a bunch of large businesses were getting this money, and it became a problem. I think you're going to find that a lot of bureaucracy is going to end up with this. I think the states are going to get a lot of money out of this. I think there's going to be stuff that goes into educational. I'm not saying they shouldn't get it, but I think when we think of the Rescue Act, we're thinking that, it's going to hit Main Street. I think it's going to hit unemployed. I think it's going to be helpful there. I think it's going to probably hit education, and I think it's going to be helpful for the states. I do like the fact that it's so targeted for vaccinations and all that. But that being said, this isn't a Rescue Act if you're Main Street.
Yeah. I guess the two areas where I saw that Main Street businesses might be, able, was people who had already gotten the PPP could go back and get more if they hadn't gotten up to the limit. So there was some additional funds there, and people who hadn't applied before could apply. So potentially, but I agree with you. There's a lot of other areas, and you and I had discussed offline that looked like there was some additional funding for the arts, which is good, and they needed it.
Yeah, the shuttered venue portion of this was a great thing, and it doesn't just apply. I mean, the arts very broadly. It doesn't just apply to the fine arts or the performing arts. It also applied to theaters and cinemas too, and so on. So there is a good addition. I work with a lot of arts nonprofits, and they were suffering. So that's a good piece. And I do think there was a few things that folks had talked about from the very beginning that had been sort of overlooked. The self-employed, right? That they didn't get the full gamut of opportunity. And I think that's been rectified a little bit here. And then some of those nonprofits, NGOs, those organizations, I know one particular one was chambers were left out of being able to get any kind of money. I don't think that's been corrected, actually. So I think chambers of commerce are still unable to participate in any of this. So there's some oversight, but I think that Washington feels like it's done what it can. I think it's using a hammer for something that we need a scalpel for, right? Mm-hmm. That being said, we have to look at this on a big picture level too, because this is likely the last bill that we're going to see. Unless we head into a massive depression, we're not seeing additional stimulus, rescue, or anything like that. Now, there may be alterations to this bill, though. There may be that there's a huge chunk of money sitting there unused, and they may change the stipulations around it to allow it to be used. I could see that happening, but there's not going to be another bill. So we kind of got to ask ourselves, looking forward, do we feel that this rescue bill is going to get us to where we need to go? Are we going to see recovery because of this? Or are we going to have an issue?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's one of the things that it's the uncertainty. What do we expect? And what can we expect from coming out of this, even with the bill and what's involved? So I see Christy's back with us here. I'm going to add her back in.
Sorry.
You're rejoining us at the perfect time. Patrick and I were just asking ourselves the question Patrick says, is this going to be enough? Likely this is the last bill that we are going to see. There may be some moving around of money, but this might be it. So in your professional opinion, what should we expect?
I would expect this has to be it. I don't know, from my understanding and where we are, I don't know where the money is coming from. So eventually at some point there's going to be changes. I would expect tax increases. I would expect maybe some inflation. And not to be Debbie Downer, we need the money. Our small businesses need the money. Our people struggling need the money. But there has to be another side to it. Where is this coming from? And keep in mind, the IRS is still not back in full swing. They are still processing 2019 returns. And that is a problem for our number one revenue generator.
Yeah. Yep.
That makes sense.
So they've got to make some changes. Things need to get moving again. Because I don't feel like it's the small businesses that are going to make it if they don't.
Yeah.
So one of the things I was saying is I didn't feel that this bill targeted small businesses well. I think that you can hope for trickle down through the states and through some other aspects, but in general, this was a huge burst of money that looked more like it was geared towards. I'll use the word bureaucracy. Is more geared towards large scale education, CDC, vaccination protocols, state government. And I'm not saying those folks didn't need it, but it's not a surgical approach to getting the economy started. It's like throw a bunch of money out there and hope this works.
Agreed. And these monies are going to these bureaucracies, education, things like that. and they're not even making plans to be back in school yet. I'm going for my master's right now, and we have no plans to be back in school at this time. So I can't, I don't think it's enough. I think we're going to see a long-term effect of COVID-19 and the shutdown. I think we can expect to see tax increases. And from what I've seen from the Biden tax plan, it's all for incomes over $400,000, which that's great, but that also stifles the investment money back into the economy. So new jobs, new investment for restaurants, for Main Street businesses, that's money that's going somewhere else. So.
Well, I think we're going to have to end it on that. Patrick, did you have something you wanted to say in conclusion, wrapping up?
Well, Christy didn't want us to have her be the downer at the end. That's not fair.
I'm so sorry.
I actually, I think this was good, because I do think there is a lack of clarity out there around this bill. And I think the answer, to sum it up, is it's a lot simpler than it seems. There hasn't been a lot of new additions. There's been a lot of extensions. Those extensions are sort of haphazard. So, my advice would be that you do need to talk to somebody like Christy, who is paying attention to this stuff pretty well, because there's so much that can get missed. When you were talking about the child tax credit and how that has to be, and the employee tax credit, and how that needs to be looked at in comparison to how you're allocating costs to your forgiveness and all, those are things that it's really going to be helpful to have somebody who knows what they're doing walk you through it.
Oh, thank you.
Absolutely. And thank you, Christy, for joining us today.
I'm so sorry. It's really windy, so our building just completely shut down.
You know what? On live podcasts, this stuff happens all the time. So
to us especially. So there you go.
Exactly. Well, thanks everybody for listening and joining in. And we hope you all have a good week, and we'll see you next week.
Okay.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you so much.